Earlier this week, the San Francisco Board of Elections, there was a recall effort there, and 3 of those school board members got recalled. Now, there's a lot of ideas about what was the reason for this. Was it parent frustration over COVID? Was it frustration over so-called woke politics? I can tell you this, there's been a lot of phrases written this way over the last week. Even San Francisco, even in progressive San Francisco. So, what is the real story here? Let us bring in the mayor of San Francisco, London Breed. London Breed was a supporter of these recall efforts. Mayor Breed, welcome to Meet the Press.
Thank you.
Let me start with, everybody has an opinion about what happened, but I want to ask yours, but I want to put up San Francisco Chronicle on Wednesday said it was a plea for basic competence. Newsweek said it's a wake-up call for progressives. The New York Times said an awakening in the Chinese American community. I could take it a step further. Joe Garofoli sort of downplayed it and said this: Tuesday's overwhelming recall of 3 school board members isn't a sign that San Francisco is marching lockstep with the conservative trend of parents taking back their schools. It was about one school board race in one city and an off-year election in mid-February. So there's all these array of takes. Mayor Breed, what's yours?
Well, my take is that it was really about the frustration of the Board of Education doing their fundamental job, and that is to make sure that our children are getting educated, that they get back into the classroom, and that did not occur. They were focusing on other things that were clearly a distraction. Not to say that those other things around renaming schools and conversations around changes to our school district weren't important, but what was most important is the fact that our kids were not in the classroom. And San Francisco, our Department of Public Health, we've been a leader during this COVID pandemic. And in some cases, we have put forth the most conservative policies to ensure the safety of all San Franciscans. And our vaccination rates and our death rates and other numbers demonstrate that we are a clear leader. But we failed our children. Parents were upset. The city as a whole was upset, and the decision to recall school board members was a result of that.
Now, there's been some speculation that the only reason 3 were recalled is 3 were eligible, and that had more been eligible, perhaps more would have been recalled. You're going to be appointing the replacements. That power is in your hands. What kind of person are you looking for? What should their priority be? And what message should the other school board members take away from this recall success?
Well, I've been talking to parents for the past couple of weeks, and what they want is someone who is going to focus on the basic fundamental responsibility of members of the school board. And that is making sure that children get the education that they need in our schools, dealing with the challenges of learning loss, dealing with the mental health challenges that exist. We have a significant budget deficit. We need to hire a new superintendent. So I'm going to be looking for people that are going to focus on the priorities of the school district and not on politics and not on what it means to run for office and stepping stones and so on and so forth. We need people who want to be on the school board to make a difference and who meet those qualifications to do the job.
One of the ousted members said this: white supremacists are enjoying this, and the support of the recall is aligned with this. Is that the right kind of reaction to what happened?
Well, of course, it's not the right kind of reaction. And the fact that we're still even listening to any of the recalled school board members is definitely a problem. Again, we should be focused on the parents. We should be focused on the school district and the challenges that these kids have faced. And that's the biggest problem. This person is making it about them when it really should be about our kids who have suffered, not just in San Francisco, but all over this country as a result of this pandemic. And let's be clear, in San Francisco, for some time now, our private schools were open even when our public schools couldn't get it together. So we have a lot of work to do, and the focus needs to be brought back to our children, and that's my goal in reappointing and appointing some additional school board members to do just that.
Look, there's been a lot of, some people want to say this is about, you brought up the focus and priorities about keeping schools open. A lot of national people have made note that they wanted to rename schools. How much of this was about renaming the schools of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and Dianne Feinstein? How much of it, though, was also parents upset that the rules were changed at how you got into some specific magnet schools?
Well, I think it was probably both, but at the end of the day, our kids were not in school, and they should have been. And kids were home suffering. The stories that I heard about children who went from being these bubbly, exciting kids to not even smiling, to being depressed, the increase in the number of suicide attempts and other things that exist, that is the fundamental problem here. And I think that we have to get back to that. And yes, of course, there were people who were probably upset about some of the proposed changes, but those are discussions that are important to have, but not at the expense of making sure that the priority of what the school district is there to do is met.
Any advice for Democrats around the country in urban settings that are dealing with this, dealing with upset parents right now? What lessons would you say should apply?
Well, this is not a Democratic Republican issue. This is an issue about the education of our children. And I think that ultimately it's important that anyone who serves in any capacity, whether it's school board or Congress or as mayor, it's important to respond to what your priority is as a mayor or as a school board member, and that is the role that you were put in the office to do. And so in this particular case, the board neglected their primary responsibility to focus on other things that are important but not as significant as what they were there to do, and that is to educate children.
I want to bring up another issue that you were pretty exercised about, and it was the rise in crime in San Francisco. I want to play some remarks you said a couple months ago that really struck me. Here it is.
It comes to an end when we take the steps to be more aggressive with law enforcement, more aggressive with the changes in our policies, and less tolerant of all the bull that has destroyed our city.
Obviously, it was some of those, we've seen the footage of some of these sort of group shoplifting robberies, things like this, and even worse. And you've wanted to get a bit tougher. You've got a district attorney in Chesapeake who you did not support. You supported an opponent. There's a recall of Mr. Boudin. You've not said where you are on this. Are you ready? Are you prepared to do that now?
Well, I am doing everything I can as mayor to keep people in San Francisco safe. And part of that means I have to have a good working relationship with our district attorney. At the end of the day, that is our primary responsibility, and I am doing everything I can to focus on that. Ultimately, there has been a lot of negative attention paid to San Francisco about some of those videos that have gone viral. But what doesn't get talked about is the work that our police department has done to make the arrest, to try and hold people accountable. So we're going to continue to do that. And part of what I have to do is everything I can to work with the district attorney, regardless of what's happening as it relates to a recall.
Well, one could argue you have to work with the school board. You were willing to come out publicly about the school board recalls. You feel like your relationship's too close to Mr. Boudin in this instance?
Well, it's a little bit different with the school board. I didn't necessarily have to work with all the school board members. There were several members on the board that I did have a good working relationship with, and I had a good working relationship with the superintendent. So I would say that it's different. I haven't made a decision one way or another about the recall. I'm still debating on whether or not I will. But ultimately, what I want to be able to do is make sure that the decision I make is not an impediment to my ability to work with the district attorney and keeping San Franciscans safe.
Do you expect there to be some crossover between the frustrations that voters showed with school board members and perhaps the frustrations they could be showing in this recall with the district attorney?
I think that, when we look at what's happening in San Francisco and the concerns around crime, people are definitely frustrated about accountability because, again, the police are making the arrest in many of these cases, and what we want are people to be held accountable. I grew up in San Francisco. I grew up in public housing. I grew up in a very challenging environment, and it's not that people don't want police. We can have police reform and also ensure safety with making sure that police are present when a crime is committed, and the district attorney's responsibility is to make sure that when the evidence is presented, that those people are held accountable.
Mayor London Breed, the mayor of San Francisco, really appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective with us. Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.